Hey, number ones, welcome back to my channel. This is the Metatron speaking. It's weird history time. Oh, Metatron, who do you think you are calling them weird? It's the name of the channel, for crying out loud. Metatron, stop insulting other people. Weird history. Popular misconceptions about ancient Rome. Very interested in checking this one out.
You probably have a lot of ideas about what ancient Rome was like.
You're absolutely damn right I have.
But odds are, many of those ideas are wrong.
Wrong. How dare you, Metatron.
It's not your fault. You're a victim. A victim of pop.
A victim of leather bracelets. He's absolutely right. I am a victim. Look at this. This is mental A word that I can't say because demonetization.
Culture. Because pop culture is full of misrepresentations of the ancient world. We're debunking some misconceptions about ancient Romans in which they lived. But first, be sure to subscribe to the Weird History channel. Then jump down into the comments and tell us what ancient civilizations you want to hear more about next.
Okay, that's great. So he's absolutely right up to this point. Now, I can't say I've said that sentence many times reviewing Weird History channel's videos. But hey, maybe this is the video that is going to be like, wow, exception that confirms the rule. Of course, whether I agree or disagree, all of my React videos have a link in the description and in a pinned comment for you to go and check the original video. And of course, we won't be reacting to the entire thing so that the original creator can get the view and likes.
Okay, fans of bread and/or circuses, this one's for you. Historiography is the study of how history is researched and written. And one of its key lessons is that looks can be deceiving. During the Renaissance, fans of bread and/or circuses.
Bread and pasta. Wait, that music. Where did I hear it?
Historiography is the study of how history is researched and written.
It's the Renaissance era in Battle Ages that has that music all the time, isn't it? Wrong. It's the medieval era in Battle Ages. Oh yeah, now I can't take it out of my head.
During the Renaissance, people became fascinated by the art produced by the ancient Greeks and Romans, especially statues painted in a variety of shades and colors by their original creators.
Yes.
But by the Renaissance, all of these paints and dyes had chipped off due to wear and elemental exposure. These statues...
That was the Fountain of Trevi. And yes, okay, so they're going into the misconception of Roman statues being all white instead they were painted. Yes, he's correct. So lovely. Good.
All of these paints and dyes had chipped off due to wear and elemental exposure.
Actually, not all of them. We still have some remnant of pigmentation that is still visible, believe it or not. And there is also some pigment that is not visible through the naked eye, but you can see it if you use the correct technology. There are several indicators of color being used in period. 1. Visible traces of paint pigment on statues and temples. For example, look at the head of this statue. Here are other examples. So as you can see, original traces of pigment still remain on some specimen. We can call this first kind of evidence observable data.
Modern researchers have since used ultraviolet and infrared technology to analyze the ancient statues, examining layers of paints and coatings that remain invisible to the naked eye. Wonder if any of these artists draw that cool S we were all obsessed with in middle school. But the Renaissance artists, who took their technically incorrect inspiration from the Greeks and Romans, made their sculptures unpainted, pure white marble look we still associate with ancient sculptures today. Copying someone's homework incorrectly? Who isn't guilty of that crime?
It's an interesting way to put it, because what we could say from this is that all white statues that devoid of color for classical antiquity and in general the Mediterranean world of classical antiquity are wrong and incorrect. But they would be correct in the late Middle Ages. So if it's statues like the David by Michelangelo, just to say one, yeah, those statues were white. It's not that all white statues are wrong, they're just wrong in classical antiquity. And in a way, it's very similar to the classical Latin versus ecclesiastical Latin debate. Classical Latin is the most correct and period-accurate way, or reconstructed pronunciation that we have reconstructed when it comes to the way the ancient Romans spoke. But if we are talking about the Middle Ages, or we are talking about the modern Vatican, then ecclesiastical Latin is correct. Ecclesiastical Latin only becomes wrong as a pronunciation if we apply it into the incorrect, inappropriate period. So we could say the same about the statues. I never thought about it that way, so that was good. Thought-provoking.
As many of these statues depict the ancient Romans wearing togas, this led to the widespread presumption that togas were everyday casual wear. throughout the Roman Empire. But in fact, togas were not all that common. They were a bit like a tuxedo, a kind of formal wear donned for special occasions, denoting a person's significance in Roman society. Only
Yeah, or even like an expensive suit. Doesn't have to be a tuxedo, but in general, you're dressing up well. Maybe you're part of high society sort of situation. The most common garment for the people would have been the tunica.
full Roman citizens were even permitted to wear togas. So let's hope John Belushi had his citizenship paperwork in order before they filmed that iconic Animal House scene.
History is written by whomever. All right, so I think they are tackling the statement history is written by the victors. I do have a video dedicated to that. So let's see if we are on the same, not that I'm right and he's wrong, I'm just saying let's see if we are on the same line of thought.
To understand how so many misconceptions about the Romans came to be, it helps to look at how we know anything about ancient Rome. The Romans borrowed their view of history and its study from the Greeks, with a great focus on their own central place in the narrative. I guess we can forgive them for that. It is Roman history written by Romans, so it's going to be Roman-centric. Romans saw history not as a definitive, objective attempt to get at fact, but more of an ever-changing narrative rooted in the concerns of the present day. If a legitimate modern historian reimagines history from a
Why the history guy?
present-day perspective, it's bad history. But in Roman times, it was good writing, which often meant writing to please an individual or group, such as the patron who hired you. What would Roman society have thought of Lin-Manuel Miranda? Let's take Rome's reputation as a society where public depravity and orgies were common. This is almost
Yeah, they weren't. It wasn't.
certainly not historically accurate.
There we
There
go.
are only a few accounts of group sex taken from any primary Roman sources, and when the subject does come up, it's usually cited as a distasteful or inappropriate act.
He's absolutely correct. It was a form of debauchery. And at the end of the day, you can't think that the entirety of the population acts that way just because you have a couple of mentioned, and as he's correctly stating, in a form that is actually considered as, oh my gosh, look at that, it's bad. It's the same thing with the idea of the myth of the Romans eating and then throwing up. It's not that it's a myth in the sense that it never happened. It is mentioned in the sources, but only when it comes to a couple of really wealthy individuals, including an emperor, and it definitely did not represent the entirety of the population. The Romans didn't do that. It's just a couple of people historically, and they were looked down, and the practice was frowned upon. Let's read it. Seneca tells us, they bring together from all regions everything known or unknown to tempt their fastidious palate. Food which their stomach, worn out with delicacies, can scarcely retain, is brought from the most distant ocean. They vomit that they may eat, and eat that they may vomit, and do not even deign to digest the banquets which they ransack the globe to obtain. So, in the sources by other Romans, they do mention this practice, but it's considered a form of debauchery. In Suetonius we read, he's speaking about Claudius, hardly ever left the dining room until he was stuffed and soaked. Then he went to sleep at once, lying on his back with his mouth open, and a feather was put down his throat to relieve his stomach. Suetonius, as he speaks about Vitellius, says, he divided his feast into 3, sometimes into 4 a day, breakfast, luncheon, dinner, and a drinking bout, and he was readily able to do justice to all of them through his habit of taking emetics. I really don't understand why YouTube makes us do this. It's so stupid. Look at the breasts of these women had to be censored. They did this in post-production, and it happens with all sorts of art, like has to be censored when it's ancient art, statuary. Otherwise, you might get a yellow dollar sign. I got a yellow dollar sign on a video of mine that got 1.8 million views. So the amount of money generated by that video was extremely low opposed to what it could have been. And the reason is because I was talking about ancient Roman sexuality, and I was showing a period art that represented it. And maybe because I used the word, well, now am I going to get a yellow dollar sign because I'm saying, and this is so stupid because then on the same YouTube, naked yoga and how to shave your private parts, they are fine. They don't get any form of demonetization. At least they don't even get anything. So it's stupid. We're doing history. If you're doing, it's like when I have to say Austrian painter. Why can I not say the name? But I can say Benito Mussolini, but I can say Stalin, but I can't say, I have to say Austrian painter. Is stupid.
opposed it and by those who could market it. I mean, minutes from the Roman plebeian council versus good old-fashioned Roman orgies. You know which channels.
Look, they have to censor everything. It's ancient art. This is ridiculous. And even if it was modern art, if it's art, we are using it to teach, discuss, talk, review. Why does that get censored? But then you open Facebook and it's full of stuff that it's crazy. It's like full on PORN, full on. And then every time I see that, I report it because I'm like, hell no. While I make a post about the ancients and it gets blocked on Facebook. It has happened a couple of times.
The Emperor Caligula, for example, is remembered today as a perverted, incestuous, and incompetent monster. Horror stories about his brutal reign of terror included watching his subjects get fatally tormented, turning the royal palace into a brothel, inviting a horse to serve as a consul in the Senate, and an array of other scandals and atrocities. If he were around today, he'd have a serious political career. Many of these
Yeah, that was a good one, mate. Okay, so I'm not always a fan of weird history, but that was a good one right there. I can admit it.
accounts come from two historians who were contemporaries of Caligula, Philo and Seneca the Younger. Philo had to resent Seneca for getting that billing. These two writers would refer to Caligula's insanity, particularly after an unknown illness in the year 37 AD. This illness has led some to believe that Caligula was the victim of a mental illness that progressed throughout his reign. However, in Roman, and probably every culture, perversity and insanity were considered bad for public governance.
Absolutely.
But these kind of juicy tales tend to be embellished over time. So it may be possible what started as criticisms of Caligula's character became exaggerated for political or entertainment purposes.
I wouldn't say entertainment purposes. I would say that oftentimes you have anti-imperial propaganda. If you look at a highly controversial emperor, which is Elagabalus, or that's how you read it in Latin, but Elagabalus, I'm going to say from now on in English just for ease of conversation. Elagabalus was an extremely controversial personage in history, but a lot of the stuff we have are 100% exaggerated because of his political enemies. You have to look at it this way. Ancient Rome had factions, political factions. And these factions had speakers, historians, philosophers, apart from the generals and orators and all that kind of stuff, influential people. And when they speak about members of the opposing faction, yes, oftentimes they will do attacks and call them names, or sometimes even misreport or perhaps exaggerate some information because they're doing propaganda against their opponents. In other words, when you read an ancient Roman historian, or when you read an ancient Roman writer or a Greek writer, you should ask yourself, okay, but which faction does it belong to? And perhaps I can make a dedicated video if you want, and we can actually put them into, I'll tell you the two factions, I'll tell you what the differences are, and then I'll tell you who belonged, what characterized those factions and their beliefs, and then who belonged to those factions among the famous people that you probably have heard of. Because really that does help us understand, okay, this is what he's saying. What do other people say, though, around? Because how do I know that that's not being exaggerated? And as I say, when it comes to Elagabalus, there is no question. It's true. Some of it is true, but some of it was absolutely exaggerated. For instance, the fact that he was putting on makeup. Yeah, the Romans make fun of him a lot because of that, but he wasn't doing that. And they do say, oh, look at this, he's effeminate. But the reason why they're saying that is because they are actually mocking his entire culture, because he is not originally an Italian Roman. He comes from the East. And what he was doing is not because he identified as a woman or anything like that, like I've seen people say. It was in connection to the ritualistic religious aspects of his own culture. Now, if we are to believe certain reports, it's highly possible that he was sexually ambiguous. It is possible that he would have liked both men and women, and that's what it looks like, that he was similar to a modern bisexual. But the makeup thing is completely separated from it. And the only way you understand that is by diving into the context. Let's see what they're going to say.
Sort of like an ancient world precursor to The Daily Show, but entertaining. This doesn't mean we should dismiss historical
I have no idea what that means.
accounts made by the Romans. In fact, there are pioneering scholars from that period.
Yeah.
But there are contrasting narratives about every past, even in primary sources. And you have to be careful what you consider bona fide and what's fluff. Here's a tip. Don't look to Hollywood, like that 1979 film Caligula. Hey there, weird
Yeah, I agree with him not to look at Hollywood. Now he has the sponsor. Yeah, he's going to talk about Nero. As always, I'm going to skip Nero because I don't watch the whole thing. as a way to encourage people to go watch the original content. So we're skipping Nero, and we're looking at cultural mistakes. Let's see what we've got.
Roman historians frequently referred to women as political power players, maneuvering behind the scenes and influencing their spouses and other high-ranking players.
We'll see what he's going to say about this, but I have to warn you that in the past, the recent past, in fact, the weird history guy has said some stuff about women that was absolutely nonsense. Like at one point, he was talking about women and combat in the Middle Ages and in classical antiquity. He said that women in classical antiquity in the Middle Ages are as strong, if not stronger than men, if only they were given a chance to prove themselves in combat, like hand-to-hand combat. He has said stuff like this that sounds more like virtual signaling than actually being coherent with the real sources and biology at that point. I am going here a little bit with pinch of salt.
Whatever means they had to achieve their political aims. Some people today, who didn't pay attention to any history classes, have concluded from this that ancient Roman women had formal positions in governance. But they didn't. Women were allowed to own property and even start their own businesses, which was unusual for the time, but they had few formal political rights. They didn't even have the right to vote. Women were present in
I would add, of course, to that, but yes, he's right.
Rome, but lacked a formal voice in elite society and had to resort to indirect methods to influence power. That came with the downside of being an easy target to blame when policies went bad. This made Roman women perhaps the most politically astute and exposed politicians who were never formally politicians. Some
I think you can put Greek women in that too.
misconceptions about Roman politics are even easier to track. According to historian Mary Beard, Julius Caesar's final words spoken to his assassin Brutus were, "And you, my child?" Caesar was likely referring to the fact that Brutus and some of his compatriots had themselves been wounded or injured in the fighting in the Ides of March.
Yeah, when it comes to that, the statement, "and you, Brute, my son," we don't know if he actually said that. There is contrasting evidence, not to mention if he did say the way we usually learn it, "et tu, Brute, fili mi," or "quoque tu, Brute, fili mi." There are a few versions. Oftentimes the Latin is not even correct. Regardless, we don't know if he actually said, because some reports do say that he said something, some reports say that he died in silence. So we don't know if that actually happened.
Though Brutus survived the ordeal, he was likely covered in blood when Caesar saw him, explaining the observation. Today, it's more widely believed that Caesar died saying, "Et tu, Brute?" or "Even you, Brutus," a more direct accusation aimed at his killer. For that
I've read it. Yeah, exactly. It's in Shakespeare.
malapropism, we have William Shakespeare to blame, who embellished his source material in his famous play, "Et tu, Willie?" Another common misconception is that the ancient Romans took ancient Greek mythology and claimed it for themselves.
Okay, very good.
Simply by swapping out the names of the major deities.
Yeah.
In this view, Zeus, the master of lightning from Greek myths, who served as the ruler of the gods on Mount Olympus, neatly transitions into the Roman god Jupiter.
Yeah, okay, so he's going well. It's a good video. I have to say, this is going well. It's true. Ancient Greek mythology absolutely had a massive influence into Roman mythology, but religion was quite different between the Romans and the Greeks. And the gods, even though they're not one-to-one counterparts, they're similar, but they're not the same. Look at, for example, he's speaking about Jupiter and Zeus, or how they say it in modern Greek, Dias. They are father of the gods and whatnot. But even if you look at Poseidon, or Neptunus in Latin, they're different. They're different. Neptunus, even at the beginning, wasn't the god of the sea, was more like the god of springs. Eventually will become the god of the sea. But there are differences in the way they were worshipped, in the way they were thought to act. Some of the mythology is acquired, some of the myths are absolutely acquired and transformed, but they're not one-to-one renditions. There are some differences, and depending on which god we look, it will be a one-to-one, like case-by-case scenario. Some will be much closer, very similar, and others will be quite different. So it's not just it's the same god with a different name. Not to mention that while in ancient Greece, the gods were seen as something very physical, very anthropomorphic. In ancient Rome, the idea, just to say it very briefly, is that the gods were more of an invisible force and something of a mystery rather than something that physical. So it's kind of a different approach even to the way these were thought out to be. And this, of course, would vary. I'm giving an average. I'm giving a very general position. It would vary probably individual to individual, but still.
Which neatly transitions into the train song, Drops of Jupiter. There's certainly a nugget of truth here. Greek religion and culture predated ancient Rome and did have a key influence on how the Romans saw themselves and their origins. But the intermingling of these two cultures over hundreds of years can't be reduced so simply into, Romans stole their gods from the Greeks.
I agree.
In fact, historians are still sifting through what elements of their shared mythologies were Greek in origin and which were Roman, and which may have been influenced by other cultures around the ancient Mediterranean.
Even Etruscans and whatnot. Okay, so cool. I'm not going to watch the whole thing. Do click the link in the description on in my pinned comment. I did like this video, so I'm going to give him a like. I obviously didn't give him a like on those videos that they said nonsense, but in this case, I have to say, very nice job. All right, so I hope you enjoyed this review. Today, weird history wasn't that weird. So thanks for that, and I will see you tomorrow for my next daily upload. Goodbye, number ones. If you're enjoying this video so far, please take a moment to check out my Patreon page. With as little as a $5 support, you can help us ensure that we can continue to produce high quality and high researched content. And at the same time, you get access to polls, extra videos, unlisted streams, and much more. Thank you so much.